Greetings and salutations. Welcome to another edition of Open Door with Vince Robinson. I am very privileged today to have one of the hardest working people in the publishing business. Her name is Nicole D. Miller. She has a great new book. It is called When Love Wins. And I really like the title because that title tells me that this is a story that has a happy ending. And I love happy endings and I love romantic stories. So with that, I'd like to welcome to Open Door, Nicole D. Miller. How you doing, Nicole?
Good, Vince. Thank you for the warm welcome.
All right. Well, I'm glad to have you aboard today and glad to talk to you about this new project. So why don't we just get the formalities out of the way right now? Tell us about this new book, how it came about, and how folks can get a hold of it.
So I have a copy right here, so you can kind of see a visual. As you stated, it is called When Love Wins, and it's a heartwarming tale of two young women who are cousins. They have a rift in their relationship, but they're both dealing with some heavy-hitting topics such as grief recovery, parent-child dynamics, abandonment, mental health issues, depression, anxiety, cutting, all of those things as they're navigating their youth. In addition to that, there's some childhood trauma. So one of the characters, Ashley, has a vendetta against her cousin Natalie, who comes to live with her. And Natalie has a spiritual experience where she feels like God is leading her to love Ashley anyway. So the power of sisterhood, unconditional love, and forgiveness is rifting through each page. And you get to find out about these characters through one-on-one personal viewpoints. So every other chapter alternates characters and you're experiencing life through their eyes. So Ashley and Natalie are the main protagonists.
Okay, interesting. What inspired you to write this story?
I definitely think a lot of it was me processing my own grief. So at the time I was grieving for the loss of my mother. Both characters have that experience. Ashley loses her mom when she's really young. We kind of see how some of her character and development plays out after that in a negative sort of way. And Natalie loses her mom within the year of us starting the novel. So both of them are at different stages of grief, but we see the impact of it and not in dealing with it and in not dealing with it. So that was really healthy for me to kind of use creative writing as a tool to process and heal from my own grief. But also my love of my college years. I went to Miami University and did my undergrad there. I accumulated all of my best friends. We had some significant spiritual encounters. So I really wanted to show the youth that it's cool to love God. It's cool to have that faith, and you can be someone with swag and who loves fashion and who loves urban vernacular. So it was really fun to infuse spirituality with African American culture. And that's like one of my goals for all of my books. But with this book, I definitely was able to take it to another level.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like you're describing yourself, Nicole.
So funny you should say that. I did create a quiz for people to visit the website and see if they're an Ashley or they're a Natalie. And Ashley is the urban socialite fashionista. She's fun, but she's also a little snobby and she has some mean girl tendencies to her. And Natalie's like the opposite. She's this faith-based writer, conservative, social justice advocate. So people usually fall into one or the other categories. And I do feel like I'm a nice little blend of both of the characters. So I was kind of able to, release some of my own qualities through both characters.
Mm-hmm. And it also sounds like somebody we know.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Someone we just talked about a few moments ago.
Oh, well, I don't know. I think she's actually, you're referring to a mutual friend of ours. She actually heard all of the book. She's one of two people that I was able to bounce the whole reading of the book to, and she definitely fell in love with the characters. Interestingly enough, she really liked Natalie. But Ashley is a caricature. I don't think that there's too many people walking around on the planet that are that extreme with some of her characteristics. At least I hope not. So
yeah. Well, I guess I was relating to the social activist part of it, of this description.
Oh yeah, yeah. I was thinking of the artistic part, but yeah.
Yeah. So tell folks right away how they can get your book.
You can go to whenlovewins.love and you can grab a bundle. Right now they're on pre-sale. We launched the pre-sale in November And so I'm doing an audiobook this time around. That's the first time I've ever offered an audiobook for any of my books. I'm actually in the stages of recording it as we speak. We're halfway through. So I'm really excited about that. And then, of course, we have the ebook and the print version. So you can go on whenlovewins.love and order your bundle today, and then sign up, and you'll be on my email list for special coupon offers and events and all of that, because the actual book launch is going to be in April, and all books will be mailed then.
Okay. I'm looking at that book, Nicole. It's got quite a few pages in it. You've been busy with that pen.
This was the meatiest book project I've ever done, Vince. Like, Stories for the Urban Soul, it was long, but it was several short stories. So it wasn't like one long story throughout. With When Love Wins, it is definitely meaty, but it is such a good read. I had beta readers involved. I've gotten a lot of feedback. I've had my editors. And one of my beta readers said it's just a fast read. Like, it engulfs you and pulls you in, and you're just kind of lost in the storyline. So
Yeah. Well, I can relate to how that happens. You know, there are a few folks that I know personally that have written novels. One is a friend that I went to college with years and years and years and years and years ago. And we reconnected about 30 years later. And the story was about an attorney and a client who had been wrongfully accused of a crime and was skating on thin ice. And it was, like you said, it was a quick read because it draws you in and you're just so compelled by what's going on. You want to get to the next chapter and the next chapter and the next chapter, and you read through it. And then in 1 or 2 days, you're finished with it. But the book that you got right there, it might take more than a couple of days. But
yeah, you could probably do it within a week if you're really into it, I would say.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, that's quite interesting. You know, I was looking at some of your optics on your website, and I think that there was one event that you were at where there were a number of authors, and I noticed something kind of interesting. I ain't see any dudes in that room.
Well, I guess it depends on what event it was. Do you know which event?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Kimberly Lawson Roby.
Ah, are you familiar with her?
I've heard the name. I don't know her personally, but
Yeah,
I've seen it
yeah.
out there. But I just
So
noticed. Go ahead.
that wasn't an event that I was an author at. I actually was just attending it. So Kimberly Lawson Roby is a New York Times bestselling author. She's someone that I definitely highly esteem and aspire to reach her levels of success. But yeah, that particular event was her book tour, and she came to Cleveland, and all of her audience, which is typically Black women, as I'm sure you saw, were in attendance, in addition to her husband. But I think that her target market is Black women, so that's what you would have seen.
Well, the reason that I bring that up is because Black women in America are the most voracious readers. So if you're marketing a book, it's probably a pretty good idea to make sure that your audience is Black and female. And also, when you look at who the most educated people are in this country are, this is anecdotal, so don't quote me on this, but I think sisters are some of the most educated people in the country. So if that's the case, if they're educated, that means they're literate. And if they're literate, that means that they can read a good book. And if they're into romance and they're into happy endings, I think perhaps you have created the perfect book for them.
Well, I appreciate that. And I do agree. I think Black women are kind of the cream of the crop when it comes to education and even just entrepreneurship and business. And so this particular book is geared towards younger audience, but I do hope that, 30 somethings will fall in love with it, reminisce about some of the childhood nostalgia. I incorporate just some like 90s lingo, even though, it's current day. And I've been told that my writing has that 90s feel, that throwback nostalgic feel. So, and then of course the sisterhood, the camaraderie between the two women and the faith, I think all of that will tie in with my readers.
Okay. One thing that I want to get back to is something that you brought up when you were introducing the book, and that is the aspect that deals with grief. And I know that it seems as though we're dealing with grief 2.0 right now because a lot of people are transitioning. And it could be just an illusion, it could be my imagination, but I think that it's really important now more than ever for people to have ways to deal with grief. So obviously, you've seen that as a subject, and it certainly resonates with you. Can you talk about your process? Can you talk about what you learned to cope, to deal with the own grief that you had to deal with?
I so appreciate that question, Vince. And I do try to offer some resources within the book as well. One of the resources that I do touch on is counseling, seeing a professional counselor. I personally have had that experience at different seasons of my journey. My character, Natalie, she's seeing a counselor, not just for the grief, but also her own mental health struggles. And then eventually Ashley does as well. So that was huge. Another thing that I touched on was the creative writing process for me. I did not write for 3 years after my mom passed. I had a blog. I had started blogging 10 years ago. And around that time, I hadn't written. I just couldn't. It was too hard for me to be intimate with my creator in that space. And then in 2020, another opportunity for grief, I actually started writing again. I picked up the short stories I started years before, and it just started flooding out of me. All of these short stories about these Black characters dealing with everyday life issues, and it became stories for the urban soul. So out of my pain, I was able to create. During the time that I didn't write, I actually was reading a lot. I was reading a lot of fiction, and it was stirring up my creative gift. So I kind of offered that to Ashley, the character, as well. She's not a writer, but she's an artist. And so she ends up having a supernatural experience through her art where she's able to use that as an outlet for her pain. So definitely two of the things off the top of my head are counseling and the artistic expression. But of course, your community. I have such amazing friends in my life. I have an amazing spiritual group, my pastors who are more like parents and family who really just stepped in into the gap for me. So I would definitely say like that piece is vital. And then self-care. Self-care is so huge. You know, I used to kind of minimize that, but now I'm all about it, getting those massages, working out, being gentle with yourself, going for walks, doing yoga, working on your breathing, journaling, anything that is making you feel good when you feel horrible inside is a plus. So laughing, comedy shows, all that.
Yes. Well, you do have a presence on social media. You're definitely not invisible. And I can see by the way that you're living your life, all those things that you mentioned are things that you're doing. I think folks could actually take a chapter out of your book and figure out ways that they could have a much greater existence, if you will. We want to talk a bit more about your book that you're coming out with. It's called When Love Wins, and it is available on your website.
It's available at whenlovewins.love. My personal website is NicoleDmiller.com. You can actually review the other books there and purchase the other books and learn more about me and read the blog. But for the actual novel, the pre-sale is at whenlovewins.love.
Okay, whenlovewins.love.
Yes.
Correct? All right. There you have it, folks. If you want to get that book, you want to go there. It's going to come out in April, and we're going to talk about that book and more when we return. You're listening to Open Door with Vince Robinson on 95.9 FM WOVU. My guest is author Nicole D. Miller. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Open Door with Vince Robinson. My guest is author Nicole D. Miller. She's written a fantastic book. It's called When Love Wins. I'm going to get a copy of this book, and when I'm on my next flight halfway around the world, I'm going to start it and finish it before I get there, because I have a feeling that flight might take about 10 or 12 hours, and that should be enough to get it in, right?
Definitely think that'll be enough time, yes.
Okay. So, Nicole, this is not your first book. You just told us that it was different from the first one because you wrote short stories, and it's a compilation of short stories. Also noticed that your first book was a hardcover book. This one is not a hardcover book, and perhaps that was a decision that was based on budget and sales and all those things that you learn as a seasoned author, having 4 under your belt. Talk to us about the other books that you've written.
So the very first 2 books are the How to Overcome Heartbreak series. The very first book is How to Overcome Heartbreak, Recovering from Misguided Love, where I share my personal story of healing from a breakup, and I give tips to others and how they can heal. The second one is How to Overcome Heartbreak, Stories That Heal. I interview 7 women and 4 men, and I share more from me. And then I pivot in my writing, and then I released my first fiction book, which is Stories for the Urban Soul, which I released in May of 2021. But this is my actual first novel, which is When Love Wins. So the first 2 books are nonfiction, memoir, and then the third book, which is Stories for the Urban Soul, is urban Christian fiction. And then When Love Wins is urban Christian fiction as well. But the first 2 stories in Stories for the Urban Soul actually take place at a Black-owned cafe in New York called Devon's. It's Devon's Cafe. And some of the characters in that book or in those stories actually show up in When Love Wins. So I am creating this world of these Black characters that we fall in love with, that are kind of popping and doing their thing. And you get to learn more about them in When Love Wins when you read the first 2 stories in Stories for the Urban Soul.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. And I'm thinking that it might be a bit more effective than some films that we've seen recently. And I'm going to bring up an example. Remember Coming to America?
Oh, Lord, why?
Then, and then they came out with another film, Coming to America 2. And 2 was nowhere close to being as good as the first one was. You got to see folks a little bit down the road, but you saw them in a way that was a bit more contrived. I think the approach that you're taking right here might be a bit more organic and allow you to develop them into something more than just buffoonery.
Oh, definitely. The first 2 stories in Stories for the Urban Soul, we kind of get glimpses of these characters because they're short stories. So you can't like flesh it out as much as you can in a novel. Plus, you're kind of viewing it from one character's perspective, whereas in When Love Wins, you're viewing it from another character's perspective. And it gives me room to kind of play around with future books that I'll probably do with spinoffs for some of these characters. So
And then the approach that you took with When Love Wins, alternating characters by chapter, where did that idea come from?
honestly, my writing is purely organic. Some people write and they have an outline and they know exactly what they're going to write. I do not write that way. I like to just sit and be in a space of worship and intimacy with my creator. So I just let it flow and I let it kind of tell me. I think for me, it was important to use Natalie's character from a one-on-one perspective so that we caught the intimacy she has with God, whereas Ashley, for most of the book, doesn't have that intimacy. And I liked that they were so opposite that I could enter this fast racing world of Ashley kind of kicking it, living her best life, whereas Natalie's more thoughtful, more serious, more intense, and has a deep fellowship with God. So I just like playing around with the different worlds. But I definitely wanted to incorporate Natalie's experience because so many of our youth may not think that they can have that when they can. And that was my experience and my friends' experiences at that age.
So it seems like there's an activist aspect to your writing. It seems as though there are some underlying issues within your own life that have caused you to want to help other folks who can work through issues that you've been through, and perhaps it will, put them in a better place. Is that something that you're consciously thinking about for the duration of you writing books like these?
It's not what I'm consciously thinking about, but most writers are told, write what you know. And I think that we naturally do that. So when you say that, I know that I've done that in my first 2 books, right? I talk openly about heartbreak, about trauma, about childhood, daddy issues, these sorts of things. And with When Love Wins and even Stories for the Urban Soul, now I have a creative way where I can implement the lessons that I've learned or my friends have learned or things that I've seen, and I can weave them into these characters' circumstances. So I think that that does happen naturally because you do kind of write what you know. It's just not so blatant. And some of the stuff is not that things that I personally have gone through, but I've observed and I've learned from other people, and I can incorporate those lessons in the characters.
Yeah. And is there any research involved in writing what you write?
So with When Love Wins, I definitely researched because the characters are located in Jersey and they do a lot of commuting to New York. So initially I thought, oh, I could just get away with interviewing some folks from Jersey and New York. In that process of doing that, it became very apparent. And one of my interviewees told me, like, Nicole, you're just going to have to go. And so I ended up taking a trip, drove 6.5 hours, stayed in a little Airbnb in Jersey, stayed there for a week and did my little commutes and navigated the city the way that I had my characters navigating it and learned the different pockets and the boroughs and the areas. So it was a whole thing. This book has been the biggest project I've ever worked on. To write something for 2.5 years, then actually do market research, go to the location, travel, conduct interviews, do beta readers, do a focus group. Because I also had a focus group of 21-year-olds that heard the first 5 chapters. So in addition to regular manuscript critique editing and then line editing and then my own several renditions of edits, it's been a journey.
So, based on your journey to the East Coast, what was that experience like for you? How did you feel about being there? And is it something that you might entertain in terms of, hey, this ain't so bad?
I honestly don't see myself ever living there. And I knew that going in. I had been to New York years ago and had kind of pulled on some of those ideas while writing. But being there at the season of my life just confirmed I do not like all of the hustle and bustle. That's why I was glad I was able to be in Jersey and be kind of outside of it and just go in when I needed to and leave when I was done. I can be overly stimulated. I'm more of an introvert in that regard. It's fun, but it's not something I would want. It's not a place I would want to live. It's, overcrowded. It smells. I mean, it's not glamorous like TV makes it.
So you mentioned focus groups. Just curious, what did you learn from the young folks that you were interacting with?
It's interesting because a lot of it was confirming. So I am removed from their age, but I'm still enough around to know the language, to know what they're listening to know, the dress and all of that. So it was confirming, but I think some of it was understanding the depth of them, especially when they reviewed Natalie's character and they had similar experiences of moving away from their home and dealing with the loss of friends and feeling left out. So the human part of it was good. But overall, it was a good experience. It was confirming. They were like, yep, this is totally on point. This is us. So
you just mentioned some of their experiential things. I'm just curious how you view your generation being different from that generation.
One of the biggest differences is social media. So when I came out of college, Facebook had just started. So I got grandfathered into Facebook, and Facebook was only for college students back then. So all of a sudden they started letting everybody in, and then Instagram came and Snapchat and Twitter and all this and that. But we didn't have any of that. We barely had cell phones. I remember learning to text in college. In high school, text or cell phones was like for an emergency, and you had beepers. So like the technology has so rapidly increased. I will also say the music. I grew up in the era of R&B, 90s R&B, and it was baby making music. They don't have that this time. They have ratchet. That's just what it is. They have ratchet music. So I think those two things are the biggest differences that have impacted this generation that's so different from my generation.
I think ratchet is a good word. And I'm not even fully sure if I know what that means. I just know, and I'm a couple of generations removed from where you are, but things are just so different. There was a time when you wrote a love song and it was a type of song that you could play when your mama's in the room with you. And now you put on some of this music and it's like they're saying things that I wouldn't want a young person to hear. And some of it is, I don't know, but that's another story for another day. But I will say this, I'm really impressed with your work ethic because it's obvious to me the various ways that you reach out to folks, the various ways that you promote what you're doing. You have a firm grasp on the technology of it, looking at videos, looking at the reels that you do, seeing you on various platforms like I get emails from Nicole Miller. I get Facebook messages from Nicole Miller. I see reels from it's like Nicole is everywhere. And I do know that we have something in common. And perhaps that explains it because the planet that governs all this activity and is Mars, and Mars is the action planet. Mars is the warrior planet. Mars is the people who are about doing things. So your birthday is in April? Looks like you froze up there, Nicole. Yeah, looks like she
All right, I got frozen. I'm
yeah.
back.
So I was just saying that, your planet is Mars, and Mars is an action planet. And I was asking you if your birthday happens to be in April.
Oh yeah, April 3rd. So I'm in
April?
Aries.
Get out of here.
Yep, April 3rd.
Okay, well, I'm the day after you. So
What?
yeah, I'm
Wow,
April
look at
4th.
that.
Now I can brag about this. You can't brag about this, but my birthday is the same birthday as Maya Angelou.
Ooh, nice.
I think Eddie Murphy might have been born on your birthday.
Okay, all the greats.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually celebrating my 40th. So I'm combining my 40th with the book launch.
Okay. 40.
Yep.
The big
Yeah.
40-year-old.
I'm crossing over.
I'm telling you, I had you pegged younger than that, but your maturity speaks for itself. So we're going to talk more about these fantastic books that you have written. And I also want to get to the Nicole D. Miller publishing empire, because you're not just writing, you are helping others who have an idea that they want to write. So you're able to do coaching, you're able to talk them through the whole publishing process. I think from what I can see, you are actually an advocate for self-publishing, and I applaud that, because so many people miss out on opportunity because they think that somebody has to take them there when they can actually take themselves there. So we're going to talk about how you can become a published author and how you can connect with Nicole D. Miller in order for that to happen. This is Open Door with Vince Robinson on 95.9 FM WOVU, Burton Belcar Community Radio. We'll be back in a few moments. Welcome back to Open Door with Vince Robinson. My guest is author Nicole Miller. She has written a few books, the latest of which is When Love Wins. And it sounds like an interesting book. It's got a few pages in it, but from what she says, it's riveting. So you'll just be whipping right through that bad boy, and you'll be looking forward to the next novel from Nicole Miller, who's told us that this was actually the first full-length novel. The first novel, so to speak, was a collection of short stories. And she's managed to weave characters from stories from the urban soul into another platform, which is really kind of a creative idea. So let's talk about the Nicole Miller publishing empire. What kinds of things are you doing in addition to writing novels?
Well, I have my publishing house, ND Miller Publishing, and we're actually working on the website right now. Depending on when this airs, it could be out there. But right now, you can go to my personal website, which is NicoleDMiller.com, and then you can click on Book a Consult. There's a tab there, and you can schedule a consultation with me, where I will basically coach you. You tell me where you're at, what your goals are, and I will give you the steps that you need to achieve those goals. You can also choose hybrid publishing services. If you decide to go with me on that, then we'll work with you on your graphic design, your interior design, your actual publishing of the book, obtaining ISBN numbers, getting your copyright registration, all the things. But the key is we're partners. So I'm a hybrid publishing house. That means we're working with you to publish your dream book, and you're keeping the empowerment of it. You're gaining empowerment. You're keeping the rights. We're not taking any of that from you. So I've heard horror stories. I actually have a meeting with someone tomorrow about a horror story that they had with publishing with someone. And unfortunately, they lose the rights. They don't have access to their books. They are overcharged. It's horrible. So I really want to educate people. I want to empower people. And that's why I wrote my book, Self-Publishing 101, Everything You Need to Know from One Author to Another, which is also available on my site, because I want people to know that they can do this on their own. But of course, if they want help, I'm here. And it's someone that has experience, that's trustworthy, that has high character and integrity. So I do all the things, Vince. I'm publishing myself. We just published two children's authors. One of them released her book. It's called The Final Battle, A Tale for All Ages. And it's amazing. And then we're in the midst of publishing someone else within the next couple of weeks, actually. So.
Okay, well, just as you're welcome on this platform, they're welcome too. So if you want to share my information with them, I'll be glad to have a conversation with them about their great works. You mentioned the horror story. I have the same story. I worked through someone to get my book published, and unfortunately, they transitioned. And so whoever is responsible for that situation right now is not responsive. So
Wow.
I'm going to have to actually republish my book. But I think before I republish, I'm going to create another book. So could you talk about what the process is for a writer who has an idea, wants to get that book published? Take us through the steps that it takes to get the book out there and on the book racks.
Sure. I would say initially it's the editing, right? So you have a raw manuscript and then you need to go through your editing process. Depending on what type of book you have, you might do developmental editing, which is what I had to do with When Love Wins, also known as a manuscript critique, where your editor is really going to flesh out your plot, your characters, let you know if there's anything in there that doesn't need to be in there. Does this make sense? Is the overall thing flowing? And the areas that are weak where you can strengthen. Then you have like line and copy editing, which are just punctuation, grammar. Does this sentence make sense? Sentence structure, that sort of thing. And you can get away with leaning on line and or copy if you're doing maybe a children's book or just like a general book that's self-help. But if you're doing a novel or something to the capacity of When Love Wins, you definitely need developmental editing and copy or line editing. So a lot of what I had to invest in with this book was the editing. So once you have your actual final manuscript, then you're going to want to do your interior layout, which is going to be how it flows on the pages, the font that's used, the spacing, if you have graphics or pictures. And then, of course, you need your cover design. So with When Love Wins, I actually had an illustrator because I had an exact vision of what I wanted my book to look like. It was going to be one of the scenes from the book. And so I put that on the front page and they captured it perfectly. With Stories for the Urban Soul, I had someone who used graphic design and imaging, but she perfectly captured my vision. And so you're going to work with someone that can do the imaging that you want, whether it's a graphic designer or an illustrator. And then you're going to want to use your publishers. Who are you going to publish to? The distributors. Where do you want your book to display and what platforms? And so I have specific ones that I work with, but there's a lot out there. And then once you figure out your distribution, you have your interior layout, your graphic design, your final copy. You have all of the things that you need to actually publish. So once you publish with your distributors, you want to make sure that your book is copywritten. You can do that at copyright.gov. And you also want to make sure you're using your own ISBN numbers, which is something I had to learn in my process. It was definitely a trial and error learning experience. So I recommend doing that so that you can sell your own book on your own platform and your own site and get more of the profit. Now, all of that is just the publishing process, but if you're an independent author doing all of this, you're going to learn that in order to make sales, you're going to need an audience. And in order to get an audience, you're going to need marketing, branding, and promo. And that is where all the real work comes in. But some people don't want to do all that. They just want to book out or they just want to book for their family. So you can easily follow those steps, or you can get my ebook, Self-Publishing 101. Everything you need to know from one author to another, or you can schedule a coaching call and I can help assist you more personally. But those are just the basics of publishing as an independent author.
Okay. So if you have this idea, you have to start, and I know in some cases you might use a template to fill in all those blanks, but if you don't have a template to work with, how do you start in terms of the writing process?
So you mean if someone wants to write and they don't have a template, how do they start writing?
Yeah, what's the form? how do you know how to write things?
Okay. That's the part where it's like you have options. So earlier in our conversation, I mentioned I'm not someone who does an outline. I'm what they call a fly by the seat of your pants writer or a free writer. But an outline is definitely a great tool. You can look those up online. There are resources. You can go to writing workshops. I've dived into a lot of writing workshops in the area. Lit Cleveland is great. I've done New York writers group online. I'm a part of Permission to Write writers group. I'm a part of Accurate Summon Scribes writing group. Like I'm in a lot of different writers groups as well. So if you don't have any history with writing or you don't know where to start, tap into your writers groups and the resources that are local. Check out your library, get some books on writing. There's some great tools with writing in different books at the library, and look into using an outline to kind of, give you an understanding of where you want to go. Or you can be like me, you can free write. But it also depends on what you're writing. If you're writing something that's self-help, that's memoir, you can pull personal journal entries, personal blogs, things that you've already written. You can kind of compile those things together too, but you still might want a writing coach to help you assist you in how to put that all together.
Okay. And when it comes to book covers, I know that one of the real issues is appeal. A book cover can make or break a book. And also the importance of having a spine where your title can be displayed and so forth and so on. How do you go about deciding what's going to be on the front and back of your book?
The way that I kind of flow is very intuitive. So even with my first book, I didn't have the knowledge that I have now, and I did feel limited with what I was presented with the distributors and publishing house that I went through. However, the second book is the one that I really regret because I didn't know that I could use artists, that I could use graphic designers to get exactly what I wanted, and they didn't include the diversity that I wanted. So that was more limiting. Now that I understand, like, oh, I can get a graphic designer, I can get an illustrator, because I'm a visionary, so I usually have a picture of what I already want, what I feel like it should portray. I'm also kind of like naturally inclined with marketing and what appeals to my target audience and those sorts of things. But you can also work with an IT branding consultant and get ideas on the message that you want to portray. But I definitely just recommend making sure that whoever does your graphic designer, because I had this issue with the client, making sure that they know the platforms you're going to publish through and that they're meeting the requirements of those distributors. Because if they're not, if they're sending you files that will not upload on those platforms, you're going to be going back and forth, trying to figure it out. So that's a hassle. But you want to make sure that whatever graphic designer and illustrator you work with, they know the requirements of the distributors. They know what the spine measurements need to look like, what the PPI needs to look like, and all of that.
Okay. Is there a perfect length for a book?
There is a rule. There are a lot of literary rules. And so the rule for a novel is around 80 to 90,000. Mine is a little over that. I'm not going to give the word count, but it's a little over that. But that doesn't mean that you have to follow the rules. It just gives you an idea. And the reason the rules are there is because most people don't write a riveting, sustainable story that's longer than 80,000 words. So you have the outliers, people who do. I could name like the Harry Potter books or the Hunger Games books. I remember reading the first Hunger Games. It had to be like 400 pages or something crazy, but I was up all night in that book. It was so capturing. So there are definitely rules that you can follow, but don't be boxed in. I do push at the rules. I push at some of the grammatical, literary rules that I know are out there because I feel like I'm a trendsetter. I feel like my style, my voice is going to capture this generation in the way only I can that I was meant to do. And even if I kind of push at the rules, I don't necessarily feel like that's wrong. I do think that some rules are there to hinder us, and they've been put there by people who are in higher power who don't look like us. And my goal is to share the Black experience voice for this generation. So,
okay. So you mentioned a book that kept you up all night. Who inspires you to write?
well, I was heavily inspired by 90s urban classics and I know that I kind of have that feel in my writing, as I mentioned before. But right now, I'm listening to The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, and she's just captivating me with her voice. I'm just like, oh, she's such a poet. Like, she's so amazing. How does she do this? But I read a lot of different types of books. I've read Christian books that have really inspired me, like Francine Rivers. She's someone that I feel like kind of pushed the envelope when it came to this pristine Christianese, westernized view in her writing, because she had a background as a romance novelist, and she kind of went there with certain steamy scenes, and I love that. And so yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different people. Jennifer Weiner is someone else that I've really enjoyed. My friend got me hip to her. She is just a humorous voice, and it's funny how people who are writers incorporate their voice and their tone into their characters. So
Yeah, so you seem to be gravitating towards romance. Have you ever thought about maybe doing some futurism or maybe some science fiction a la Octavia Butler's? What's your thoughts about what's coming in the future for Nicole as an author?
I feel like I'm not that creative because you have to really think out of the box for sci-fi and to be an Octavia Butler. Like, I like sci-fi, I watch it. I can't say I read it as much. Even reading like Hunger Games, which was very out of the box, like, I appreciate it, but could I write it? Like, I don't know.
All right.
Yeah, but I do see a spinoff with the Devon's Cafe, with the storylines that are developing in my head with those characters. It'll probably be the areas that I'm most acquainted with: mental health struggles, sisterhood, friendship, love interest, that sort of thing. Healing, a lot of emotional healing, inner healing, self growth, higher power, spirituality, those types of things.
Okay. So you've got some other things going besides publishing. I know you do events from time to time and you're bringing folks together. I want to talk about your footprint in the community because you're not just limiting yourself to just one lane. And I also know that you have a business outside of the publishing business, and this is probably a busy season for you up till around 12 days after your birthday or possibly longer?
Well, you know what, Vince? I actually had to step away from my bookkeeping company. So I stepped away about a few months ago. And it's interesting because I do feel like it was a spiritual thing. Like, I had that bookkeeping company for 4 years, and it was a legacy to my mom and my grandma. But it got to a space where I did not enjoy it as much. And that joy was diminishing. And all of the joy that I had was in being a creative. And I just was tapping into this space of creativity, not just writing, but even social media, like you said, the events and all of those things. And I knew, like, it's time to step away. In addition to my publishing house growing, I really didn't have the capacity to do both well. So I actually have laid down my bookkeeping company as of right now. I did have some tax clients trying to hang on, but I just had to, be strong. And, you never know when that door will open again. But for now, I feel like all of my efforts need to be in the creative space. And to your point, my friend and I were doing these open mics within the city, which were great. Those might pop up again at some point. Hosting and then creating lanes for other authors to share their works, other creatives in Cleveland to have a safe space. So I'm always looking for opportunities there. But everything needs to affirm what I know I'm called to, which is being an author and being a storyteller and giving a voice to the issues that are in my community.
Okay. Well, I'm going to applaud you for your courage there because I know what it's like to step out on a leap of faith. Although it happened 9 years ago for me, almost 9 years ago, when I stepped away from that, direct deposit every other Friday. So we're going to talk more about what you're doing out there. And again, congratulations for stepping away from bookkeeping. I know it's not quite as exciting as creating these scenarios in your mind and having people envision those based on what you've written. We're going to talk more about that when we get back. This is Open Door with Vince Robinson on 95.9 FM, WOVU, Burton Belcar Community Radio. I'm with Nicole Miller. She is the author of When Love Wins, and you can get it by going to whenlovewins.love. More about that and more when we get back. Welcome back to Open Door with Vince Robinson. I'm with Nicole Miller. We are rounding third and heading home. She just told me that she gave up her bookkeeping business, and I know this is tax season, so she was making money hand over fist, but she's chosen to focus her efforts on her creative abilities and get away from that mundane numbers crunching, which she was doing as a tribute to some of those who came before her. So tell us what it was like to anguish over that decision and decide, well, let me try something different. What was that like for you?
I definitely knew it was going to be a step of faith. But it wasn't a hard one because my heart was changing and I recognized it. It was like, this isn't giving you excitement or joy in the way that it did before. For other people, bookkeeping sounds boring, but for me, it wasn't, it was fun. And that's why I did it. But it stopped being fun. I was trying to get through and rush through my bookkeeping work to get to the writing work, to get to the creative part of my life. And so that's when I knew I had to recognize. I also got some pushback. The very week that I decided this is over, I got like 4 different referrals. And I knew like this is trying to distract me from what I'm supposed to be doing. Like, where are these people coming from? So, but I was able to refer those to another Black female CPA in Cleveland. So that was good. And she and I have a great relationship. But it wasn't difficult. And I've had so many other open doors that have taken the place of letting that go. I think often when we say no to what we're not supposed to be doing, we hear the yeses to what we are supposed to be doing. One of the open doors was, I actually am a freelance writer for the Cleveland Observer. I don't know if you're familiar with them at all. And that's been really cool because my undergrad in college for a split second was journalism. I didn't pursue it. I didn't feel led to pursue it. So I feel like that was something that kind of got brought back around to me. So now I have this space of journalism that I'm, building on with my writing career. And again, the publishing house, doing all the things that I do with my book, gearing up for this novel release, and doing a lot of promo, interviews, all of those things.
Okay. Yeah, journalism can be exciting. Just reflecting on my life. At one point, I was a journalist, but I was a radio journalist. I worked in radio for 8 years. And one of the cool things about it was I got to write something every day. They were short stories. So I'm writing a story that's a minute long or a minute 30 long or whatever. And I'm putting people's voices in the story. But it was just something new every day, aside from being a beat reporter and covering Cleveland City Council and covering the courts and covering the Justice Center and federal courts and stuff like that, being general assignment. It was kind of exciting. What kinds of things have you been writing about as a freelance journalist?
And that's the thing. I have a great editor to where I can incorporate like my life of things that I'm already doing. So my very first article was on a book club that's really well known in Cleveland. And so it was a part of the literary community geared towards women. I was able to cover it. It was at the Cleveland Public Library. I did an interview with a prominent, well-known author, and she hosted Glossy, which is Great Lakes African American Writers Conference, which you already know, Leah. So it's like incorporating my life already. My last article was on Futureland, which I don't know if you were familiar with. They're basically hosted by Jumpstart, and one of my good friends who I published her book as well was one of the leaders of that. And so I was able to interview them and get insight on what they're doing in Cleveland in this next year. It was our first African American and Hispanic Latino conference for Black and Brown people. And so it was geared towards entrepreneurs and artists and creatives. And it was a big deal. It was at Ernst & Young and all this stuff. So it's like the world I'm already immersed in with entrepreneurship, the literary community, the movers and shakers of Cleveland. I'm able to talk about those things with the paper. So
yeah. And there are a lot of perks that go along with being a journalist. A lot of times you can show up to the party and not have to pay because you got a pass.
Well, I'll remember that. I mean, I haven't paid thus far, but
Yeah.
I'll have to remember that for future reference.
Well, you know, the reason that you're there is because somebody else wants to know about what's happening there. So, you know,
Yeah, that's
they're going to
true.
open the door for you to get in so you can report on what you see. So, you know, that's a really good way to save a few coins, and perhaps you can invest them in your business or somewhere else where they'll be of much greater benefit to you. I want to give you a chance to shout out the folks that you're working with, because I know you don't do this by yourself.
Well, I have contractors, but I do have a few editors that I work with. So Piper UC is one of those editors. I really appreciate her. We actually met at Lit Cleveland's workshop last year, and it was a fiction-based workshop, and we so connected. She's an amazing writer, and she was also one of the beta readers for When Love Wins, in addition to doing some line editing. And then Shonda Bynum, so she just came on staff and she's doing developmental editing. So I'm so appreciative of them. Meredith Rucker is someone that's a graphic designer for me. She does great. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm definitely not a one-man show, but I'm working with the contractors until I can take on some full-time employees, which hopefully will happen within the next year.
Yeah, and that was something else I wanted to get to. I know you have maybe a short-term vision and a long-term vision. What's your short-term and what's your long-term vision for your publishing empire?
Well, the short term is getting the website up. So we just started working on the website, and hopefully that'll be up by next month. That's going to be a game changer for sure. We have the IG page up, and then the links for scheduling booking with me personally that I shared with you. The long term is I hope to obtain at least 2 clients per month. That's like a great goal for me. And so far, we're kind of meeting the goal, but I think it'll go on a whole nother level once the website is up and obtaining my ideal market. But yeah, those would probably be the overall goals for sure.
Okay, and some of the events you alluded to earlier before we finished the last segment, you're talking about open mics and such. Could you talk more about what that looks like?
I think the open mic thing is seasonal, and it's got to be the right timing for everything. My partner and I were trying to obtain some venues that weren't really a good fit, and all of this and that. So we're trying to be sensitive to the timing. Plus, we both have our own projects. But for the publishing house, I do foresee more workshops, which I kind of dabbled in as Nicole D, the author. But the ebook, the webinar that I did last year, so you want to be an author, that was a webinar that I did. Those things I want to do more under the publishing house, because I want to equip people more with how they can do this either on their own or partnering with me, so that they can have education and knowledge to not be gypped and taken advantage of, and make sure they keep all of their rights and get all of their royalties. So I do foresee more workshops, more speaking engagements along those lines, because again, I want to empower people with knowledge and education.
Okay. What are you seeing in terms of our community? Are you seeing a lot of engagement around literary activities and poetry and whatnot, or is it something that seems to be waning? Are you seeing an increase or an uptick, particularly post-pandemic?
I honestly feel like I've seen other, poetry events happening that I personally want to tap into. So I think the poetry community is strong in Cleveland for sure. I know that I am immersed in multiple communities. So I'm in the literary community, but I'm also in the entrepreneurial sector, and I'm in like the fitness sector. And so those are kind of like my I would say my outlets, and what I know about as far as that's happening in the community. But I feel like, yeah, I know a couple of spots have kind of shut down that have kind of hindered that, but I'm seeing some newer groups that have kind of sprouted up as well. So I think Cleveland is just a basis for creativity. It's a hub for creativity. We've had so many artists, so many successful people come out of Cleveland. I don't think anything can stop that, because it's been going on for decades, I'm sure, as you know.
Okay. Well, you have a tremendous presence on social media, as I have alluded to. You want to kick the social media before we leave?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Instagram at HTOHB, which actually stands for How to Overcome Heartbreak, the name of my first book. You can follow the publishing house at ND Miller Publishing. You can follow my Facebook business page, facebook.com/HTOHB. And once in a while, I'm on Twitter at Nicole D. Miller.
Okay, all of those choices, and then the website for your book.
WhenLoveWins.love.
Whenlovewins.love. I'm looking forward to that story. You know,
I
I might find,
appreciate it.
yeah, I might find a piece of me in there somewhere. You never know. But
You never know. I definitely pull from real life experiences.
yeah,
So.
yeah. Well, I was just being facetious about that, but who knows? Maybe I'll inspire you to write something down the road. We'll work on a character for Vince Robinson. How about that?
Sounds like a plan.
We just had to call him something else so everybody doesn't know. Nicole.
Vince Robinson.
Yes. One day older than this fantastic person sitting in front of me right now.
Birthday's coming up. Exciting.
Yeah, I think this year I'm going to claim 41. How about that?
You're allowed. You're allowed.
All right. Nicole, it's been a pleasure. Please feel free to reach out to me when you get that next book and you're ready to come out with it. And as I said, I'm happy to talk to the folks that you're putting out there now. I think everybody needs to know about the folks who are doing great things. And this is a kind of an opportunity for me to plug Black Local Artists of Cleveland, Kuumba. We're doing a directory of local artists, and you qualify. So we need to get you into Largemere Arts to get your headshot taken, and we'll take your 500 word or less bio, and then we'll put you in that directory as well. And then people can come to the Cleveland Public Library and pull that book off the shelf, open it up, and see Nicole D. Miller, author. How about that?
Sounds great. Thank you, Vince.
All right. Thanks for joining us on Open Door. And as always, know yourself, love yourself, be yourself, make today your absolute best day, Cleveland and the rest of the world. Peace.